Should executives bother with scheduling? How much scheduling should they know? There's an old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, which is commonly followed by a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Executives are probably well versed in project management as a whole, but is it necessary for them to participate in scheduling? And if so, will that break something? Scheduling is arguably one of the most mathematical or driest aspects of project management, perhaps with the exception of risk management. Hence, during executive briefings, questions often boil down to specific timelines and dates. But is that the best thing for a project or an organization? What is the role or responsibility of an executive vis-a-vis schedules? This presentation is intended to answer the following questions. A. Is there a need? What happens if executives do not participate in schedules? B. What are the responsibilities of executives when it comes to scheduling or time management? And C. In order to fulfill their obligations, what concepts do they need to know?
Talking points of this presentation. Why do managers need to understand and review schedules? Characteristics of good and bad schedules. Common mistakes. What should an executive or manager expect from a schedule? Questions that should be asked in a schedule review. Executive and managerial homework. Understanding schedule recovery options.
Before we get down and dirty on how executives should participate in building schedules, let's A. Define the existing problem. B. Find the root cause. C. Share some time-tested solutions. D. What you as executives or program managers who have to interface with other executives regularly can do to alleviate the problem. And E. Next steps that may be beneficial to your organization. In the experience of some program managers, the problem statement boils down to mismatched expectations and flawed execution. The vision of the executives is often lost when translated into programs or individual projects, and flawed execution results in stress, not only for the project manager, but for the team as well. In meetings, we project managers provide detailed answers which don't appear, quote unquote, straightforward. And at the same time, we feel that the executives are oversimplifying things. The devil, therefore, is in the details. So the big question is, what aspects of scheduling do the executives need to know that are meaningful, actionable, but not overwhelming? For the most part, executives are interested in market share, portfolio growth, and employee satisfaction. Naturally, they tend to ask three questions around the iron triangle. Scope. Does the project meet market needs? Schedule. When will it be done? Cost. What's the dollar amount? Life is a tad more complicated for us project managers. In order to answer the question, when will it be done, we need to turn many knobs and look at many dials. Talking in such detail at executive briefings often result in a loss of interest. Therefore, a simplified list consisting of A. Priorities, B. Deliverables, C. Plan, and D. Action-oriented reporting may help ease the vocabulary mismatch. We could reframe the question as, what are the benefits of a good schedule and why executives need to emphasize good schedules? And the answer could be as simple as predictability and standard methodology of getting a project back on track. As every project manager knows and every executive should know, every project goes off the rails, at least on some grounds. This is not to be misinterpreted as loose planning, but it is virtually impossible to predict everything. If everything is always on track, then perhaps efficiencies could be found. Predictability of a schedule is something we program managers owe the executives. We always escalate with options, but the determination of the final path from killing a project to providing additional funds is the responsibility of the executives. This may sound familiar, There are two schools that lead to giving a cold shoulder to scheduling. A. Outright hostility, and B. Open to suggestions but lacking skills and personnel. Why bother with schedules? Schedules are meant to be broken. In the agile world, we deliver value. Schedules don't fit in. Scheduling is micromanagement or difficult at best. Is it worth it?
Schedules have benefits, but no one has scheduling skills. What are scheduling skills anyway?
We project managers are familiar with the iron triangle, but the executives may need a refresher. Each leg of the iron triangle has two aspects: A, what the executives provide or top down desire, and B, what the project manager owes the executives, aka bottoms up schedule or the feasibility of the plan. Leg 1, Scope. An executive provides the level of technical debt or the flaws in the product that the market can bear.
A project manager provides a description of the deliverables, that is, the translation of the vision to an executable plan.
Leg 2, Time. An executive provides the deadline, that is, by when the product must be available.
A project manager provides the answer to the question, how long will it take?
Leg 3, Resources. An executive provides the level or envelope of funding.
A project manager lays out the estimate of how many resources are needed.
A follow up question for the executives would be: which of the three legs is A, absolutely fixed, B, which leg has to be managed, that is, try to meet, and C, which leg must give way when things go off the rails, that is, what is the method of corrective action?
Examples. In a project that has to go through regulatory or compliance, the scope must be met by definition. It cannot be shortchanged. It is absolutely fixed. Time has to be managed, and cost overruns may be tolerable. In a sprint, the time box is absolutely fixed. The resources are also committed, hence, scope has to be managed through prioritization. In a sustaining engineering team or a call center, the resources are absolutely fixed, and the flow or the number of issues or calls has to be managed, similar to metering traffic entering a freeway at rush hour.
Now, the executive may answer all three, but it is to our benefit that we educate the executive that all three legs of the triangle are not created equal. Sometimes analogies can help, but nothing works better than lessons learned from a past project. One thing we project managers may want to demonstrate to the executives: prioritization prevents logjam, improves productivity and cash flow. Smooth flow through the shop is one of the biggest benefits of good scheduling, and is achieved through prioritization, something that the executives are responsible for. Best to use an analogy. A. Does a fire truck or police car have priority over civilian traffic? Why are we required to move to the right while the emergency vehicles have to move to the left? B. On the internet, should voice and video traffic have the same priority as email traffic? Is a choppy phone call or buffering video more annoying than a slightly delayed email? If everything is priority one, then nothing is priority one.
To demonstrate the point, create three projects, 3 months each, worked by the same team, as shown in the first screenshot. Show that the team is overloaded, that is, the projects are all infeasible, and there is a logjam at the end. To remove the overloading, one could stretch out each of the projects as shown in the second screenshot. This results in all projects being late, and there is still a release logjam for the downstream teams. On the other hand, if the projects are prioritized, not only is the overloading removed, but the logjam at the end is also broken. While the second project is being worked on, the first one is out in the market making money. This idea of better cash flow or earlier realization of ROI is sure to attract the attention of the executives.
The second most important thing to educate the executives on after prioritization is schedule integrity. We always try our level best to pull in the schedule, but not at the expense of schedule integrity. Establishing proper dependencies, translate to executives as having a proper process or workflow is absolutely vital, and breaking that workflow could increase risk to such an extent that the plan may not be feasible. Things can be better, faster, and cheaper as long as schedule integrity is maintained.
The above example is taken from an actual schedule submitted in a high-tech organization. The team wants to follow the V model of development, so as code is being designed and developed, test plans can and should be written. However, actual testing cannot be done until the code is available, at least in some testable form. In order to pull the schedule in, the team has decided to break the dependency between write code and execute tests. This may have pulled the schedule in on paper at least, but the integrity has been lost. Therefore, this plan, in reality, is not a plan at all.
Depending on the level of maturity in the organization, it may be necessary to broach the issue of buffers and contingencies carefully. Let's talk about contingencies first. Most executives are probably familiar with the terms risk and mitigation, but they are likely unaware of how they fit into a schedule. Without overwhelming the executives with the nuances of project management vocabulary, that is, the difference between contingency and buffers, one could use the word cushion or shock absorber. Examples and analogies certainly help. A. Why is there a spare wheel in the trunk? Alternatively, why carry a jump starter or a tire inflator? B. Why do we allow for ground time at the airport? C. Why even bother buying health insurance? And the answer to all the questions above is simply things may go wrong because of things that are outside the control of the PM. It is not to state that things will go wrong, but if they do, the project should be able to absorb the shock. In other words, a risk by definition is uncertain, but planning for mitigation is certainly certain.
Sometimes executives may ask to see a risk register, but it is very unlikely that they know how it gets translated into the shock absorber in a schedule. Having a risk register and not having a corresponding placeholder in the schedule itself makes the schedule inconsistent by definition. A time-tested method is to openly show a shock absorber at the end of the schedule, which is approximately 10 to 20% of the outstanding leveled critical path. The project manager must be completely transparent about this. First, why 10% to 20% of the leveled critical path? The answer to that is, if the risks occur outside the critical path, the slack may be enough to absorb the shock. And if that makes a non-critical task critical, it will be handled by the outstanding critical work anyway. For those of us who use Microsoft Project, the technique is to show the cushion or shock absorber as a single task. The actual mitigation actions should be shown as inactive tasks in the schedule and should be activated only when the mitigation is actually taking place. Another critical point. There are some risks that may recur. There are certain risks that do not recur. A classic example of a recurring risk is resource loss. A good example of a non-recurring risk is delay in getting a sign-off from a regulatory or compliance board for a particular artifact. Say, for example, getting a building permit. Depending on the recurring nature of the risk may not have a retirement date, and the cushion may be held onto by the project manager and not given back.
Buffers are required to handle the errors that arise out of estimating. These are not external causes. These arise from the estimating process, which by definition is A, within the control of the team, and B, statistical in nature. In other words, the schedule must contain a shock absorber for the external factors or risks, as well as the internal factors such as estimating. Yes, both. If the team estimates using the worst case scenario, that is high estimate, there is obviously no need for a buffer. If, however, the schedule is made with median estimates, no, not mean, then some fraction of the difference between the median and high estimate must be encoded as a buffer. No project manager expects all tasks to be executed exactly as estimated. That would defeat the statistical nature of the problem. Half the tasks will come in or before, and half the tasks will come in late. The bad news is that the short, better defined tasks will come in early, while the creative, ill defined, and long tasks will come late.
The question still remains, what should the length of a buffer be? A good measure is 50% of the difference between median and high for the outstanding leveled critical path. Once the task has been completed, there are actuals. There is no uncertainty left. The value of the actual always trumps plan or the prediction.
Now that the executives have been trained on the need for a cushion or shock absorber, it may be time to tell them when and how the shock absorber will be used up. This is referred to as the rule of thirds. The length of the shock absorber is always dependent on the outstanding work or tasks. The rule of thirds is as follows. If less than one third of the cushion has been used up, go into watch mode. The project is not yet in trouble. If one third to two thirds of the cushion has been used up, the mitigation or recovery plan has to be put in place. And finally, as soon as two thirds of the cushion has been used up, the team must execute the recovery plan. Let's exemplify this with a few numbers, assuming that the organization works with a 10% cushion. At any point in time, if the remaining cushion divided by remaining work is between 10 and 7%, just be in watch mode. If remaining cushion divided by remaining work is between 7 and 3.5%, the recovery plan must be fine-tuned and ready to go. If remaining cushion divided by remaining work is less than 3.5%, the team must go to the executives with recovery options and must execute the approved recovery plan immediately. In conclusion, there are three things that executives need to provide: priorities, deadlines, and budgets.
And there are three things that project managers owe the executives: schedule integrity and predicted outcome in terms of scope, time, and cost. Where things can go wrong, what are the options if things go wrong?
An executive who understands the pain of project management may be able to visually inspect a schedule. However, a formal schedule audit can greatly improve the performance of the shop. A schedule audit is essentially checking that all managerial deliverables and support have been met, and most importantly, establishes credibility for the project manager.
Yes, it may appear that it's all about anticipating what can go wrong, when, and what's the impact or corrective action. But the more important thing is that an executive wants to hear that it's all rooted in reality. Experience from past projects, trial releases, feedback from focus groups, etc., have all been taken into account, and that the infeasible items can be quickly identified and quickly acted on. An executive needs to understand that there are three essential phases in each project: planning, pre execution, and execution. And for each, they have certain deliverables. A good executive needs not only to provide support, but also ask critical questions. The set of questions in the checklist above is exhaustive, but at a minimum, the executives should be asking the following in the planning phase: what are we doing, not doing, or doing if time permits? What is the minimum viable product, and what's a good to have? Is the tops-down schedule or deadline reconciled with the bottoms-up schedule? How long it is going to take? And are all the tasks in the bottoms-up schedule been assigned to real resources? Is there a risk due to a new workflow? And is there a proper risk register that is proof that things have been thought through? Are the estimates derived from past experience? Are they buffered? A schedule with buffers is usually shorter than the one without.
In the pre-execution phase, an executive needs to understand how a project manager has managed risk. The greatest risks are around integration points or an item on a critical path that is done by a critical resource. And yes, how is the risk mitigated? Which leg of the iron triangle is our mitigation arm? In the execution phase, an executive must ask, What's not tracking to plan? What's the impact? Is there a mitigation plan in place? When should the mitigation be applied? If the project is in trouble, the recovery options may take on different flavors depending on the nature of the project. That is, which leg of the iron triangle is absolutely fixed. If scope cannot be compromised, in general, the directive is to manage time closely. Resources or costs are most compromised. Crashing or assigning more resources is a reasonable, time-proven technique, but it can also be applied to well-defined, well-understood tasks that do not require much ramp-up for new resources. Crunching or making the team work overtime is also acceptable, particularly when hiring resources who need substantial ramp-up, but it may lead to burnout. Fast tracking, that is breaking a dependency or using a lead, that is starting the task before the dependency dictates, should be the least favorable option.
If the project is bound by fixed resources, that is, it is confined by the infrastructure, then there are two legs of the triangle that a project manager can tweak. A, more time, B, less scope. If scope can be dropped, it raises the question, which scope? In other words, there has to be a clear definition of must do, should do, could do, and won't do. This is also known as Moscow analysis and is a time-tested technique. Careful attention, however, must be paid to the breakage of compatibility and interoperability, or negative quality, which is the subject of a separate discussion. In this scenario, crashing is not an option. By definition, it's fixed resource. Crunching may be acceptable, but again, attention must be paid to burnout. Fast tracking is always a risky option, but in this case, it could be considered. Very few projects deliver time. Uptime testing or soak testing are typical examples where time is absolutely the fixed leg. As unusual as they are the hardest to manage. The only real options are dropping scope and fast tracking. As bad as it may sound, if the scope or backlog is well prioritized, projects can succeed since the paradigm tends to shift towards a minimum viable product, which is fixed scope by definition. Fast tracking may be an option too, but a close eye has to be kept on the increase of risk, and risk management may be harder than managing schedules.
Here is the dream product. Just get it done.
Sure, but we need a minimum viable product, committed subject matter experts, stacked prioritization, and a well-defined budget.
Are you sure the plan is feasible? Why should I have confidence?
We are using tried and tested processes, historical data, and the risks have been thought through.
All right, what are the risks? And what can I do for you?
The risks are both technical and operational. You can help by resolving the escalations.
What's the status? Are you on track?
No, but there are options. Drop scope, delay the schedule, or increase the budget. Thank you so much for your attention. It would be great to answer the questions in person, but if you do have questions, kindly email them through Sushmita Sharma, VP of Professional Development of the chapter.